Hello everyone, myself Jatin Varu, and today I am present a presentation on the Indian writing in English before independence. Before the get the information of the major writers and their works, it's most important to get information about the brief history of Indian English literature. So under this title, The Voice of Empire, The Rise of Indian English Literature Before Independence, we are going to discuss brief introduction about the history of Indian English literature. So this is the hypothesis and research question for my presentation. The hypothesis: the rise of Indian English literature before independence was a critical response to British colonial rule, blending Indian tradition with English literary forms to extract the cultural identity and recite the imperial dominance. The research question of this presentation: what were the key contribution of the notable writers to the growth of Indian English literature during the colonial period? Personal information, the table of content, the beginning of early Indian writing in English, introduction to English to India. As you all know about the English comes with the Britishers when in the late 19th century Britishers comes to India for traders and business. With them English comes in India. Early Indian English literature. The Travel of Dean Mohammed, published was 1794, is considered as the first Indian text in English. It was written by the Dean Mohammed's advocate for English in Indian expression. Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Henry Dorsey promote the English express in Indian culture and intellectual ideas. The context zone of language, how Indian connect with English language. The first is the employment with British official and traders. The Britishers provide the jobs to an Indian, and the most of work happen in English language through and for the jobs and traders. The Indians slowly and steadily writing and speaking the English. The intellectual marriage creating a bilingual household. Of course, the Indians and Britishers do the marriages on that time, and for that English introduced in Indian families. The social relationship fostering cultural exchange. The embers of Indian English writers. Early pioneers like Dean Mohammed, Ram Mohan Roy, and Dorsey blended Indian themes with the English forms, providing the way for Indian English literature. Notable writers and their works. Here I mentioned some notable writers and their brief information. For more information, you can visit the site which I have cited after the information of each and every writers. The first one is Henry Dorsey. His notable works of Fakir of Jungira. It was published in 1928. Dorsey is considered the one of the first Indian poets to write in English. He is often regarded as a pioneer of modern English poetry. His poetry was influenced by British Romanticism. Dorsey's work expressed the patriotic and nationalism sentiments. He was a critical and colonial rule. Mitchell Madhusudan Dutt. His famous work was Capective Lady. It was published in 1961. Dutt is major figure in Bengali literature. His work is in English also gained a promises, and the Capective Lady is an epic poem by Dutt. The poem showcased his romanticism and use of classical English literary forms. Dutt's work blend Eastern and Western literary tradition. The most popular figure among the Indian English literature, it was Rabindranath Tagore. Is famous for his Gitanjali, Home in the World, and Gora. Tagore was poet, philosopher, and culture icon. His work Gitanjali won a Nobel Prize in 1931. Tagore's English translation of his work, especially Gitanjali, introduced his spiritual and nationalist idea to the Western world. He is one of the famous, most important figure in Indian English literature. Aurobindo Ghosh, it was also a famous figure in Indian English literature. Aurobindo was a philosopher, yogi, and poet. He was famous by his most famous work. It was Savitri and Life Divine. Aurobindo contributed greatly to Indian English literature. His poem Savitri is known for mysticism and philosophical depth. The most famous writer and author among the students, it was R.K. Narayan. His notable work, Swami and Friends and The Guide. Narayan is known for simply yet profound the narratives. His work often glimpses into Indian life. Many of his stories are set in the fictional town of Malgudi. His work are deeply rooted in Indian culture, yet accessible to the global audience. Mulak Raj Anand, considered as portrayed the low caste people in their work. Anand's novels were written in 1930. He was famous for his most popular novels like Untouchable and Coolie. His work focused on the lives and oppressed, highlighting issues like caste, poverty, and struggle of the lower caste people in colonial India. Anand's writing was groundbreaking in its portrayal of the social realities. The influence of British colonial rule. British rule in India introduced the English language, which became the main language of government, education, and business. As a result, many Indians began writing in English to express themselves. British colonials also brought a new types of literature like poetry, novels, and drama. Indian writers started using the Western literary style, but adjust the theme of the reflect their own cultural society. The themes of Indian English literature were strongly influenced by the colonials. Indian writers began addressing topics like losing their cultural identity, fighting for independence, and the conflict between tradition and modern life. Colonial rule also gave Indian writers chance to share their culture, tradition, and history with the world. This helped to create a sense of pride and national identity among Indians. Postcolonial theory, which looks at the effect of European colonization, also became the important in Indian English literature after the independence, sharing how writers and explore their past and present. The English, Britishers and English provide the stage to Indian writers to promote themselves on global stage. Pioneer female writers and their contribution. As similar here, I mentioned such a major pioneer female figures. For more information, you can visit the site which I cited on the bottom of the page. Sarojini Naidu. Sarojini Naidu, often called as a Nightingale of India, blended with vivid imagery and melodic language in her poetry. Her collection like The Golden Threshold and The Bird of Time showcase her lyricism. Her poems reflect the deep love for India's people and natural beauty. Toru Dutt, known for her fission and Indian themes with English poetic forms. Toru Dutt and her sister Oru were among the earliest Indian women's poets writing in English. Her works like Asian Ballads and Legend of Hindustan brought an Indian legend into an English literary tradition. Dutt's poetry often reflect their richness of Indian culture with romantic sensibility. Kamala Das, renowned for her honest and introspective poetry, Kamala Das, also known as the Mathuri Kuti, it was her pen name, wrote about the personal and universal themes, especially around love, identity. Her collection, Summer in Calcutta and The Descendant, emphasized the frank realism, respecting a woman's inner life with a modern sensibility. Her work is seen as a bridge of contemporary Indian poetry, often challenge the tradition norms. Gauri Deshpande, known for her reflecting and often ironic style, Deshpande's work, such as Between Births, explored themes of love, memory, and identity. She addressed the complex emotion landscape with candid realism, portraying the struggle and joys of human experience. The integration of Indian tradition and mythology. How Indian mythology can provide a stage for new modern writers to reimagine the story and draw any other character's perspective. Cultural foundation. Myth provide the story value and lesson. Myth provide a story. The story is already written and is give a freedom to the writers to reimagine the story and write the story of any other character's perspective. Epic influence. Mahabharata and Ramayana inspire the universal theme like war, love, and sacrifice. Modern adaptation. Myth remains to highlight a human struggle. From Indian myths, we find a lot of adaptation in cinema also. And recently we talk about the cinema like Adipurush also. Preservation. Tradition builds with modernity to keep myth relevant. Example, like a Beast by Krishna Uday Shankar merged a Narasimha mythology with the theme of crime and justice. Conclusion. The growth of Indian English literature is a result of cultural exchange, historical event, and the way Indian tradition were woven into English writing. Early writers like Dean Mohammed and Henry Duersey used the English to share Indian ideas, and Raja Ram Mohan Rai encouraged the English for intellectual growth. Later, women writers like Sarojini Naidu and Kamala Das brought the uniquely Indian themes and perspective to their works. Well-known authors like Rabindranath Tagore and Mulak Raj Anand used English to discuss Indian identity and social issues by mixing Indian stories, value, and modern topics. These writers create a lasting influence that continues to shape Indian English literature today. These are my references. If you get more information about the history of Indian English literature, you can go with the book of History of Indian English Literature by M.K. Nair. So this is the end from my side. Hope you get some fruitful information from it. And now, if you have any question related to my presentation, feel free to ask.
So Jatin, my question is, can you identify any major theme which were mostly explored by Indian English writer before independence?
In colonized Indian English writers were mostly used their literature as a tool for fought against the Britisher. Among them, we find nationalism is the major themes, like many of work of Rabindranath Tagore, like Gitanjali and The Home and the World. We find the nationalism as a key theme of their works. And in The Home and the World, we find the Tagore talk about the Bengal partition of 1915 and how they are suffering from this partition. People were suffer lots of things and problems. So nationalism is a major themes of the Indian English literature, pre-independence writers.
So Jatin, my question is, can you provide examples similar beats of stories that are reimagining of Indian myths?
Similar to Beast, we find other books like Sura and Arya by Nilam Kand. And in Arya, we find the reimagined story of Ramayana, reimagined story of Kauravas, perspective of Mahabharata. And in Asura, we find the reimagined story of Ramayana by Ravan's perspective. And we talk about our native language. So we find the very famous book by Vinod Joshi sir, and it was the Serendri, a reimagined story of Draupadi's perspective. So this is end from my side. Thank you.